Welcome to The Gateway, your compass through magical waters of spirit communication, broadcast live from United Public Radio Network, 107.7 FM New Orleans. I'm your host, C.L. Thomas. I hope you guys are having a great week. It's Tuesday once again, and I think I'm going to go back to the old roots of the paranormal tonight and talk about haunted houses. It's been on my mind quite a bit, and particularly a little old house located in Atchison, Kansas. And everybody knows about this place. It's called the Sally House. And joining me is the author of Haunted Voice, Todd Bates. Todd, welcome to the show.
Hey, how you doing, CEO? Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's really great to catch up with you again.
It is. It's been a while. It's been too long.
It has been. I've been a guest on your show. You've been a guest on Small Town Tales. We've gone back and forth for the last year or so.
Mm-hmm. It's been a lot. It's been a lot of fun. And I'm looking forward to this. And my goodness, that house behind you looks so familiar.
Yeah, well, it should, because aren't you one of the original people who discovered this house back in the day? At least 50 years ago or something.
It was 2000, the end of 2003, 2004. I worked for a magazine called Haunted Times. Chris Moon owned that. And I was his assistant editor for the magazine there. He came to me one day. He says, "You ever heard of the Sally House?" I said, "No, I never heard a thing about it." And he says, "Well, we're going to get you out here. We're going to investigate it." I said, "Sounds great." So we connected there in Atchison. Beautiful little town, by the way. The town is gorgeous, like a little Norman Rockwell painting. But this little house on 4th Street just completely engulfed me. When I saw this house, it was almost as if I was home, so to speak. And I remember going inside there for the first time. You can feel the heaviness.
Well,
the energy
first
was.
time I've seen this house.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you froze up. There you are.
You still there? You kind of faded out. I'm really sorry.
Yep. It's okay.
The first time I saw this house was on television years ago, and I don't know, the big tree in the front yard with this little creepy looking house just kind of grabs you right off. I think it was maybe it was Ghost Hunters or something. This was I feel like this was 13 years ago or more. But before we dive into this, how did you get into the paranormal?
Well, that was several years ago. It was end of 2002. Jason Snyder's team was having a tour here locally, and I was a skeptic. I didn't believe in any of this, and he convinced me to go to the tour. So I went to the tour, and he said, "Bring a recorder, a cassette recorder." So I brought that, and it was an old general store. I go away from the crowd back to an old barn, capture my first EVP, and bring it home, analyze it. And it was a horse, of all things, in this barn. And it stomped and everything. It had the whole 9 yards on this thing. It was just completely baffled me because there was no animal. There were no animals in there. It was an old abandoned barn. So that I became very interested in electronic voice phenomena, communicating. And that was my forte. That's what I did. That's what I studied. She's having trouble finding the show. I'm sorry, CL. She's having
it's just one of those things, huh? If she goes to YouTube lot on my feed, author CL Thomas on YouTube, she can find it. On YouTube.
I'm so sorry. I'm getting her right to it. Don't worry.
So you're a radio man now, right? Is your background in radio?
Mm-hmm. That was my forte in the beginning, was broadcasting. Uh, that was one of my passions. It's what I went to school for. And paranormal research, I was skeptical about because I didn't believe in ghosts or anything that matter. So what I did was, to make a real long story short, because it really does go out there. I took broadcasting, mixed it with the paranormal because I became so interested. Back then, there wasn't any Facebook or social media really at all.
I
There
think
were
we had
chat rooms and
MySpace.
things. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Tom was always there to listen. But there, you had your MySpace and places like that, but you couldn't talk about things like that. It was still kind of taboo a little bit back then. This was before the big television, ghost hunters, and all this, and people were really in tune to it. So I joined his team and began investigating with him. And him and Sarah Estep, they both took me under their wings and taught me. I was like a sponge. Everything I could learn. I would just absorb it and go. And that little house behind you, I don't speak that name very much anymore. It's a labor of love, that house. And it's also hell at the same time. I don't think, the house is active. The first investigation, we captured some evidence. We witnessed some things. We actually all saw an apparition together of a little girl in the kitchen. And we don't know if it was little Sally, and we don't know if
Yeah.
that's her true name or not, because that's not etched in stone. I met the Pickmans and became very good friends with Deb and Tony. And we bonded very well. And they taught me a lot. They were the ones that originally lived in the home and
Okay, I was going to ask you that. Were they
had the
the
attack.
owners?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. They rented it off of Les, who used to own it back then, and they had several encounters. Brutal, vicious attacks. There were some scratches. There were some things caught on fire. All kinds of different things that they would experience. And they were on the television show Sightings back in the day, and the Sally House was there. Peter James became involved. He's a psychic. He's passed on. Great psychic, Peter was. And he is the one that coined the name of the little girl, Sally. That is what he saw. But the story...
There's no historical records of what. Okay, let's start with what actually happens, or what is believed or what's the legend behind this house with Sally?
Well, allegedly, what happened was back in the late 1800s, a little girl had appendicitis and needed emergency surgery. So what they did was, back then, they just used ether. And the doctor would come to the house, came to that house, allegedly. He used to live next door, and came to that house, put her on the table, put her under, and began the surgery. And apparently he didn't give her enough ether. She woke up. Of course, she was in a massive amount of pain and passed away from that. And her father was there supposedly at her bedside. So the little girl dies. The father becomes enraged. The doctor, we believe the doctor haunts the house. We believe the father haunts the house. The mother haunts the house as well. The mother's the cranky one. But there's several different spirits in the house. Now, I just want to clear some up. A lot of people feel, and the Pickmans may feel this as well, that the house is demonic. I don't feel as such. I don't feel there's any kind of demonic presence in the home. It doesn't have the signs of that. That's one of the things that I oh my goodness, I have researched that home, been to that home so many times. I didn't get that energy, and I felt that energy at other places, but I didn't get that energy there. It was just malevolent. There's what I believe to be a spirit that controls the other spirits, doesn't allow them to speak or leave for that matter. And there's several different voices we've captured from there. Some have been children voices, some adults, some male, some female. Other instances at the home. For the first time in 10 years, Tony had never been back inside the house ever since all that happened. We took him in against my better judgment. He went in there. And I said, okay, Tony, you can go in, but you need to sit here in the living room. Just stay here. And he said, okay. And he came and sat in this camping chair that we had set up there. And he's sitting there in the chair talking, and he goes like this. And he pulls up this remote control. And the thing is melting right before our eyes, this remote control. This remote had been lost at his house and showed up here. It was very strange, just really strange. So we set that on the table. Of course, we're examining it, running meters over it and all this. It's a remote that's melting. That was our conclusion. It's a melting remote. And he said, okay, it's still here. And he said he wanted to walk around and see his old room. And we took him up. I was in the little girl's room, allegedly. And then he was in his old bedroom. And he comes out as we come out. Him and Deb come out. And his wrist right there was just slashed. And there was no blood. It was about a 2-inch cut. There's a video of it on YouTube. You just YouTube Sally House attack. I got that on film. But it did not bleed one drop until we got outside. And then it started to bleed. And against my better judgment, Tony wouldn't go to the hospital. We dressed it and took care of it. And he went back in there to face his fears. And nothing else happened to him that night. But we had a lot of strange occurrences that night. Sounds. There was I don't know if you're familiar with the term phantom furniture. It's like a rumbling upstairs. There was like somebody was moving dressers.
Oh, moving furniture around.
Yeah, moving furniture. And there's no furniture in the home at the time. But that's what we heard all night while he was there. And then the basement was extremely heavy. It was very draining. It just took a lot out of you. But the house itself, I went back. I became obsessed with it, of course. I would wake up at 2 in the morning, hop in the car. Yeah. I would wake up at 2 in the morning, hop in the car, drive to Kansas from Illinois. It's just impulsive like that. It would draw me there. And there was a key above that I would use and go right in there. The owner was okay with me going in there. And I took my team in there a few years later. And I don't know, to this day, he won't tell me. An investigator on the team had an experience in the basement. And it scared him so bad, he left. Not only did he leave, but 2 days later, he quit the paranormal entirely. He was a welder. He just went back to welding. He was terrified. Something terrified him in there. Something pushed him out of the field. And I don't know what it is to this day. I think he maybe saw an apparition down there or saw something down there. The basement is, oh my goodness, the rumors with that basement. No, I don't think little Sally is buried in the basement. I don't think there's any bodies in the basement. I don't think it's anything like that. I think with that basement, some things were practiced down there that shouldn't have been. It was a mixed race home back then. There were a few slaves that would come, and Deb and I were at the library and looking for any trace of a Sally from the home. And all we could find were the records of a Sally being buried. And now Sally was mixed. Okay. It was in the homeowner, the mom had an affair with one of the slaves. She got pregnant, booted out. That was the alleged story. And then little Sally, when she died, she was buried because they had a segregated cemetery back then. And she was buried a Sally. Well, we don't know if it's the one. No, I don't want anybody to, you know, but she was buried in a mass grave with other kids. That's what we found records at the library. And that just made it even more confusing.
Has anyone been back to the cemetery where she's buried?
We went there and couldn't find any grave markers or anything. We oh my goodness, circled that cemetery and went to the segregated section and couldn't find any kind of markers. There was no markers. It was a really strange thing on the list at the library. It just and it was spelled with a Y. It wasn't spelled with an I, i.e., just Sally. And that's all it was. There was no last name. So we didn't know if it was that or, you know, so we just pretty much put that in a book, in a case book, and it's locked away and towed somewhere. That information. But the mystery was never solved on what really happened because no one in the town's talking about it. Something happened there.
It sounds like this case needs to be reopened.
It does. It does. Not by me.
What's interesting is hauntings like this they always seem to have some kind of tragedy attached to them, such as the case with the little girl Sally. The theory being that there's an intense emotion that gets left behind in the house, or that somehow a piece of the person is left behind from trauma.
Right.
However, there seems to be so many negative reports attached to this home. So I watched a documentary just recently about some investigators in the home, and they were scratched and other things that you have just reported, very similar. Do you think that this is a result of a little girl?
I think she's probably the strongest spirit in there.
You've already said that. What do you think? What's your theory on what's actually happening in this house?
I think there's, I think there's a child in there. There's a mother and a father, and there's a family in there. Yet there's other spirits that come through there. I believe there's a couple portals in there, maybe a vortex or two. The basement being one of them. I think it's linked with other places as well. This house, there's a restaurant there in Atchison that's very. We get the same voices. We got the same voices, the same people talking because we investigated that location as well, and they were almost tied together, like it's all connected. And it's strange because a lot of the evidence captured out of there was on cassette recorder, of course, back then. But there was a lot of echoes. There was normally with a cassette recording. I mean, I have one I could play, but I didn't send it to you to pull up here, and you'd be able to hear the sound. It's almost very tinny, but you can hear what they're saying. Almost, it's a Class B at best. What I heard on the EVP, what I heard was a child saying, "Come here, Jill. What are you doing?" And it was real tinny, and it went in and out. So as far as the communication in there, it's there. And I think they communicate very well if you give them the time to do so. Right now, it's a tourist trap. I don't
Yeah.
know if they're even there any longer, if they finally left. I have no clue. I've heard mixed people that have been there and said they've received nothing. And you get that. You'll go there and it's just a house. There's times
You know
it's
what,
just a
Todd?
house.
I think modern day this is why I don't do any group investigations anymore. People are
Mhm.
so focused on the equipment or talking to each other. There's really no investigation actually goes on. When you join these big group investigative things into these popular tourist traps now, that's
Mhm.
what you get. So
Yeah.
if people are continually going in these big groups and not getting it, of course you're not getting anything. You're not
Yeah,
focused on.
they're not going to. I don't think
Yeah.
they're going to because they're in this for the wrong reasons. You have to go there with a beyond open mind. And, for a lot of people, it's hard to open the mind to
Mhm.
something like that. They're going in expecting a little girl, and you don't always get a little girl. Something doesn't always catch on fire. It's touch and go with that place. But that place, I believe, I'm proof of it, lives on other people's emotions and feeds off of it. The spirits in there will attach to you quicker than you think. I have a couple attached to me from there that I can't get rid of. They have bothered me everywhere I've lived. I've lived in Chicago, Florida, here, doesn't matter. They've all bothered me in some way or another. And Deb and Tony and I keep in touch. I let them know. They let me know when they're being bothered. It still bothers them. There's something with that house that it needs people there to live, to survive in that realm, to get the energy from them. And what they're doing to it now, oh my goodness, it's a powder keg. It's a powder keg in there right now.
There's and one of the girls that she was one of the leaders of this investigation that we did at the Washoe Club in Virginia City, the Ghost Magnet. She's on here. But
Oh, Michelle.
she says you're really cool, by the way.
Oh, thank you, Michelle.
She has her group is really cool. So they do really small group investigations. I think there's less than 14 people and they do it twice a year. And I've been on one of them. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to get back there with them. But what they do is there's two places that they believe is connected with spirits. It's the Washoe Club, and it's the name escapes me. It's one of the fraternities. They have like a meeting hall or something that used to be in Virginia City, and I'm sorry, the name escapes me at the moment, but
Okay.
they'll break the people down into two groups. Oh, the Knights of Pythias. That's right, Knights of Pythias. So, and then they'll try to do like the Estes method or whatever to try to communicate back and forth between the two buildings to see if the spirits can recognize each other. And we'll be in contact with each other, either cell phone or whatever it is. And we'll ask questions back and forth to see if we get anything. It would be a really neat experiment to do that with the Sally House in that restaurant that you're talking about.
It would. If you had one at either location doing that, that would be a great experiment to do. And oh my goodness, I welcome that. I mean, back then, I investigated that house heavy for 10 years. 10 years of my life gone from that home. But what you take away from it, you have those two locations that I feel are connected. I think there's some kind of door in between the two. You have, for example, I introduced very heavy levels of white noise to the house. I did that for 3 days. I was there for 3 days, and introduced static electricity, 3 days. 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 3 days white noise, and brown noise. And those completely amped up the house, and it made it easier to communicate to the point where you could physically hear some of the things being said as they were being recorded. I only wish I'd had better equipment back then, but I didn't. I just had a straight recorder, video camera, standard camera, nothing special. And I never captured any good photographs out of there, or good video for that matter, other than what happened to Tony. But with that location, there's a lot of people that want to go back to it, that want to return. And I just want to warn them to be careful. If they do, don't play lightly with that place. That place will run you out. If it wants you out, it will run you out. It's run us out of there several times. Jeremy Pippin used to go there constantly. Jeremy Hawthorne, I took him out there once as well. He got to experience it. And it's a different experience for each person. I'll say that. Some things that happen in the home are meant to happen in front of you and you alone. Private. It's not one of those, hey, we're here, perform. It doesn't work that way. It's festered. It's in the walls. It's in the land. It's just a complete circle of activity. And like I said, it's a powder keg because you have so many people going through it now. You're just feeding and feeding and feeding and feeding and feeding. And pretty soon it's going to show itself again. And normally when it does things like that, we can tell, the Pickmans especially, when there's large groups in there, when they're doing things in there they shouldn't, they get affected. I've been affected when there's been large groups in there. It depends on your love for the place, your bond to the place.
Do you think that there's some sort of past life connection?
I would say so. I would, because that would be the only way to explain it. I mean, I all these years of doing that, CL, I can't put a finger, and I had to close it. I had to close it because I could not figure it out. It's like having a jigsaw puzzle. You get it put together and it just comes back apart. You put it together, it goes back apart. There's always a missing link in that place. I couldn't connect anything. And it wasn't just me investigating it. There were people on the team with me, of course. You never go to that place alone. Oh my goodness, no. When I would go to town, there were 3 people I would get to go in there and help me. And, we'd go in there and do it together. Safety in numbers in there. Plus, you want to have as many eyes and ears as you can. You need that. Now, one thing I wish, and I kick myself in the butt for it, I wish I would have taken a psychic medium in there with. Now, when I first investigated it, Chris Moon, he was a sensitive, but he really didn't know his abilities back then. He really didn't have a control on him like he does now. And he had a lot of experiences in there. He nodded out. He was run out of there 3 or 4 times that day. What we would do, when you get that feeling that you're not wanted, you better get out. You get that feeling in that place, and we would go across the street where the Glick Mansion is there, across the street, and stand there for 15, 20, 30 minutes, regroup, go back in. Now, you have some people in there that are sleeping in there now. I guess they have a sleeping room. You can sleep in little Sally's room.
So you can actually spend a night in this place?
I think so. Yeah, I know you could in the past. They had a special room and you paid.
I might have to sign up for this.
Yeah. I slept in there for 3 nights and nothing happened to me. I mean, I would be recording and so forth and get evidence and things, but I didn't have any weird experiences or anything. And that's pumping it with a lot of different sound patterns and so forth to get them to communicate. This was back before the shack hacks and all that fun stuff. We just had white noise and static electricity and things you can introduce to it. And it was a nice sleep. I mean, I was tired from the drive and setting up and so forth. But, a lot of it is hype too. You've got to separate, the crap from reality.
Yeah. Well, that happens with any location, especially when it's
Sure.
kind of hot, like, I always make the example of Robert the Doll, for instance.
Yeah.
Everything that's been said about that doll has been fabricated and incorrect. And everybody thinks the doll is like a giant voodoo doll, and he's really not. It's more the building he's in that's haunted. But it's that hype, everyone expects.
It's the hype.
You're going to find what you're looking for, basically.
You are. And it raises attention. It raises red flags to a lot of people too. That house, that investigation. We had, Deb wrote a book, a great book that has the truth in it, to the best of her knowledge from what happened. And it's called The Sally House, obviously. But then there's other things that had made that house famous. Now, I investigated it before it was famous. It was just a little house on 4th Street. It wasn't really famous. But a lot of things, television made it famous, of course. Word of mouth in town made it famous. And the town loved it because it would bring people to the town. So they celebrated the little house and other places there that are pretty haunted as well. So you have to separate yourself from that. Open your mind, go in there with an open mind and with caution as well, because not everything you hear and see is going to be legitimate. It's an old house. It's going to have a lot of creaks. It's going to have a lot of bangs. It's going to have a lot of different things, a lot of noises and so forth. A lot of things happen. You've got to be sure to check your weather, are there any solar flares, all these kinds of different things before you make judgment on what you captured in there or what you witnessed in there. Now, some of those things can also spark that kind of activity. Like that apparition we saw in the kitchen. It was a very stormy night, lightning, thunder, the whole 9 yards. Did that amplify it? Did that thin a veil enough to make this appear? All 3 of us saw it. It was right there in front of us. And you can't explain something like that. You can't reach out and grab it and put it in a bag and hey, look what I saw. You can't do that. It's just for you. At that moment, it was for the 3 of us. It was called a collective apparition when more than one sees it. But that place drove me nuts for 10 years, CL. It really did. It drove me nuts. It still does. It's still. Sherry and I were just talking about it before this, and she said there's some things that happened to her that I know why they happen, and now we have to cleanse our home. And she didn't know what tonight's topic was. That's why she's so adamant on watching. She didn't know until I told her. And I said, we've been planning this for a little while because she doesn't like me talking about it.
Oh, because it'll bring it back.
A
lot of people will say stuff like that. They won't even talk about. It's funny that you mention that, because there's a tour guide that lives in Romania that took me into the Hoya-Balki forest. I'm probably saying that wrong, but it's the most haunted forest in the world, and all this stuff happened. And he never believed in any of that stuff until one night he and his friends had stayed the night up. There's like a opening in there where no trees will grow. And he and his friend stayed there overnight, and he had such a terrifying experience that to this day, he will not talk about it because he's afraid of drawing that spirit back to him. I find that really interesting.
I have that fear as well. And you know, when I did Haunted Voices for years, I always called it the house we don't speak of. So I didn't, but yet that is still acknowledging it. And not that it's a demonic haunting and it's bad to acknowledge it. It's a malevolent haunting, I feel. Like I said, I don't feel anything demonic in there. It's a shared experience with a lot of people. And I would like to get people like Chris, myself, Jeremy Pippin, Jeremy Hawthorne, get us all back together and talk about it and what we experienced there and what happened before all this hype hit, because it's exploded now. Now everybody and their brother are bringing little toys to a little girl that may not even exist.
Right, right.
The nursery is filled with little dolls and trinkets and things. And that used to be just a bare floor.
How long has the house been empty now?
The 90s. Yeah, late 90s, I'd say, because no one would rent it after the Pickmans. It was on national television. So poor Les he couldn't rent it. You know, no one wanted to live there and go through that too. So he would let people come investigate it. Les would. He was real cool about it as well. You know, hey, I'm not charging you, but if you could leave, you know, some money for the heat and air, that kind of thing.
When the Pickmans moved in there, did they know that the place was haunted? So what happened to them?
Well, I believe that the first thing that happened was a toy flew across the room when they were watching television.
So they had kids.
Yeah. They had a flower was in a vase in the kitchen window. Now, it was a rose, a pink rose, and it burned from the inside out. Okay. We couldn't do that with a lighter or what have you. That was something supernatural that burned this flower. Well, Deb was doing dishes when this happened and witnessed the whole thing. That was another instance. Tony was scratched. He would just wake up and have these huge scratches up his back, his sides, his arms, and they were deep. Also, I'm not going to say became possessed, but it was more of he was just driven on protecting his family, doing the best for his family. And he did some crazy things. It made him argue. It made him, you know, real bad fights and arguments and things that they would go through. And then
it was affecting him emotionally.
Oh, sure. And what made him move was a photograph. They were in the nursery. That's where their youngest was, in the nursery. And the photograph showed this huge shadow hovering over the crib. And, you know, there's nothing to make that kind of shadow in there. And that's the straw that broke the camel's back right there. And of course they move, they get tired of it. They get tired of the abuse. Well, they didn't move far. They lived in the same town. They moved down the street to a new home, but it still affected them. You know, it still affected their lives. And that's when I was introduced to them.
For those that are just tuning in, we're talking about the Selly House in Atchison, Kansas. With the Pickmans, they had just moved out, but what do you know about the history aside from, like, I know you mentioned there was some stuff happening in the basement that shouldn't have been. Was there stuff going on in the house before the Pickmans moved in?
Well, that's the rumor. That's the rumor. Before the Pickmans moved in, I don't know if it's still in the basement or not, if you can see it, but there was a pentagram spray painted on the basement floor. And it's believed that the woman before then practiced dark witchcraft in the home. Maybe what could have happened is she conjured them up. She opened a doorway. They can't be closed. That's what we came up with. The lady that lived there before them was a strange one. And
Okay.
that could have been what happened. That could have been what started it. Very well, because they weren't aware that the house was haunted at all. They just, it was a nice house, decent price, rent. Hey, let's move in. Let's raise a family. That's what it was about. I mean, it's a beautiful home. It's a nice little house. It really is.
It's a cute house.
Mm-hmm.
Just looking at it, the story with the physician that used to live there, it kind of doesn't make sense that a physician would live in a house like this.
Well, he lived, you see that red one that's next to it?
Yeah.
That's where.
Trying to turn.
Yeah, that's where he would live.
Okay.
And then little Sally's room, it was on the second floor. Right there, it's an old Victorian style, so it's the top window there, the top front window. That's her little room, and then behind that were Deb and Tony.
The little girl actually lived in the house, and the physician lived.
Yes.
Okay, that makes more sense.
Next door.
Okay.
Yeah, the physician lived next door, came running next door.
Even turn of the century, a doctor wouldn't live in a house that small. You know what I mean? They would live in a.
Right.
Kind of a nicer house.
The house next door is much bigger. Yeah, that's the alleged story. That's just you can't, and like I said, the town doesn't really talk much about it. You can't really pull anything out of them. I didn't anyway. Maybe somebody else could if it was reopened, but it does need to be reopened. Is there really a little girl in that home? I saw a little girl. I don't know if it was the little girl that died tragically like that. I've heard the mother, I've heard the father, but again, you can't prove any of these things.
Right. Sometimes I think when you're dealing with a negative entity like that, sometimes it can mimic something else that's more familiar or less threatening, just to kind of draw you in. That's happened to me before with the house I lived in Nashville. And I wrote about it in my book, Dancing with Demons. But I went away for the weekend, and there was some investigators in the house. And they caught a bunch of little voices of little kids saying, "Where's Crystal? Where's Crystal?" And they sounded cute, but there was no kids in this house. There's no way that with the activity that was going on, those were not real kids. So,
you know what they were.
Yeah.
And that's what made me think this house was that. That's seeing that little girl, because with a demonic haunting, I'm no demonologist by any stretch of the imagination. I've been on investigations with demonologists and learned from them. But with that, it is going to show itself in something innocent form. And what is more innocent than a cute little girl in a dress?
Right, exactly.
More innocent than that. So maybe, like I said, I don't think it's anything demonic, because there's no other signs of demonic activity. You have Tony. Was he in the oppression stage? Maybe. But I think it was more frustration, anger, things of that nature, due to what this was doing to his family. Not necessarily him succumbing to this demon that's in there. I don't feel it demonic. There's no sulfur smell anywhere. There's no growls or any type of demonic sightings that I had witnessed while investigating, it's always been malevolent. They've always been cranky. Little Sally, the little girl, apparently is fixated with fire. There was an EVP session Deb and I and Jeremy did up there in her room. We had a little candle because she loves fire, supposedly. We put it in the middle of the floor. And we had the recorders going, and we had asked Sally, Deb asked Sally, can you blow out the candle? Can you blow the candle out? We didn't hear anything. The candle flickered just a tad, but that could be a draft. You never know.
Mhm.
Still didn't hear anything. Session ended. We processed the audio. And what we heard when she asked that question on the cassette, we heard a noise and then a female at the end. And I've got that recorded too. I can send them to you later and you can disperse them if you want.
Yeah, I would love
Wrote the
to.
incident.
I can attach them to the show for replay.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I've got 2 good ones I'll send you. That way they can get an idea and hear it for themselves. And at the end, the female voice says, whispers, too hard. And that was our conclusion. It's too hard for her to blow it out, which I wouldn't think that. I mean, she has, Deb had a rag doll that was sitting on the steps that she caught on fire while it was sitting on the steps. It just spontaneously combust. The flour, the scratches and things on Tony. Now, I was never abused or hit, scratched, or anything while in the home. Tony was cut. He was definitely shaken up. We had to take him out several times. So it's still there. And I think it's always going to be there. It's just waiting for that right moment again. And when
Mhm.
that right moment comes, it's going to alert the Pickmans. The Pickmans are going to let me know, or it's going to alert me. I'll let the Pickmans know. So it's again, it's always
It's a
connected.
circle.
Yeah.
It's like you're in its
You
web.
can't get away from it. You just can't get away from it. I became too obsessed with it, and that's why, excuse me, I became too obsessed with it. I lived and breathed that little house. And so did they. They began investigating it as well because they wanted answers. Now, their conclusions are their conclusions, and mine are mine. And we respect each other's because I think, if I'm not mistaken, they believe it is something demonic in nature in there.
Mhm.
You know, Tony was raised Catholic. I was raised Catholic. So we just, there's some things we agree to disagree on. But
Well,
I
Todd,
can't stress it enough to be careful.
how did you decompress from that whole investigation?
I still haven't. It took a long time to separate myself. What I found myself doing with that case was getting out all the old evidence and going through it again, and then putting it all away, taking it out, going through it again, and then putting it all away. And then finally, I put it all away and I haven't touched it for a reason. There's 2 reasons. I don't want to get back into that kind of case. And number 2, I don't want to stir anything up for anybody either. Because it's so hard to explain. When, like I said, when a large team or there's a bunch of activity in there of people and so forth, and it gets fed, well, it releases. And that release affects the pigments. I can't stress it enough. Every time someone goes in there and does something stupid, hey, let's provoke it. And they do.
It lashes out.
We reap the whirlwind from it. And I need to get myself checked. I've got a few attachments from that place that I can't get rid of, and I want rid of. I want them out of me. I want them gone so I can move forward. But that house doomed me, but helped me at the same time because I learned so much from it.
Mm-hmm.
And would I go back in there? I would, if I had the right people, the right equipment. I would go in there again and see what's going on, what has happened. Do I want to? No. I have no desire to go there, but I would. But
Do you
I'm
feel
also
like
afraid that if I did go there,
do you feel like it's one of those things that do you feel like you need to go back there at some point just to close that chapter?
for closure,
Mm-hmm.
I've never got closure from it. No. And I would like to revisit it just to close that. For me, let somebody of this generation reopen it with new minds, new eyes, new ears, new equipment. Reopen it and work the case. Don't work the freaking cameras. Work the
Yeah,
case.
work on the case and don't worry about TV.
Yes. If there was a team that would work the case without being filmed, I would go with them and help them any way I could. The Pickmans would help them as well. I know Deb and Tony would. It has to be the right people because it's
Mm-hmm.
been through so many. It's just it's a powder keg. It really is. And it's a matter of time before somebody gets hurt and wonders why. Well, when you provoke something, when you poke a bear, that bear's going to strike, and that house will strike. There's a lot of times where it's dormant. It lays there dormant, like a lot of demonic cases do, but also a lot of malevolent cases do that as well. I feel they can come and go as they please there as far as that vortex is concerned, but I also feel a part of them are trapped. Only certain ones can leave, some have to stay. There's so many ins and outs for that case. It's insane. I wouldn't recommend it for the lighthearted. I don't for the enthusiast. I don't recommend going there. It's a good way to get hurt. It really is. It really is.
Well, Todd, we're almost at the bottom of the hour. We got maybe 5 minutes left. Could you tell us about your book?
Oh, sure. Love to. It's called The Haunted Voice. It's an autobiography. It's actually got some of this case in there a little bit. It was a passion to write. It was a release. It takes you on a journey of what happened to me, how I got into the paranormal, how I got into some other things, and how I even wound up on the other side myself. Can
I ask you this? The other things that you got into, do you think it was a result of the Sally House? Yeah.
I
know it's hard to talk about.
It is, but like I said, it's so connected. My life, when I investigated that house for 10 years, it was turned completely upside down, complete chaos. I was a raging alcoholic. I abused everything I could because I was trying to escape. I was trying to get that out of my head. Those images, anybody that's seen an apparition out there, once you've seen it, you can't unsee it, and that image is just tacked to the back of your mind, and it's always there. You close your eyes, you blink for a second, you remember that image. I'm remembering it now, and it's scary as hell, when you see one of those, because you're not supposed to see that.
What did it
When you
look
have
like?
two people
What did it look like?
wearing it, she had like shoulder length hair, was curled, and then you could see the ribbon. Now the face was kind of distorted. The eyes were uneven. I remember that because it almost looked mongoloidish. The eyes were uneven, and there was a little white dress. I couldn't see any legs, but there was a little white dress, and it flared at the bottom, and then it disappears. Well, she was there for about 3 seconds, and we all just froze. And then that was it. Gone. So it was one of those, and that was right in front of the basement door where that happened. And then immediately after we went to the basement. So there's a lot more, I can sit here and tell you. It's just we don't have the time. But I mean, there's so much more with it, CL. And I can't stress enough for anybody that goes there, be careful, be cautious, use common sense. Don't provoke in there. You're poking the bear. It affects the Pickmans. It affects us. It affects a lot of people that have been involved in that home. It affects them all, so just be careful when you go there, if you go there.
So where can people buy your book?
Oh, they can find that on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple Books. I took my website down. I retired from that. If you guys want a signed copy, you can send me an email, toddbates@gmail.com. I can get you a signed copy of it. It's only $10. Can't beat it.
Todd, it's so nice to have you back on. Thank you for being a guest tonight.
My pleasure. Thank you very much, CL. It's been great catching up with you.
You've been listening to The Gateway, and I'm your host, CL Thomas. Until next time.